They laughed. Not just any laugh, but the kind that crawls beneath your skin. The kind that carries judgment, mockery, disbelief. The kind that says, "How dare you?" cloaked behind snickers and sideways glances. She stood there, a black woman, alone, exhausted but not broken. Her voice barely wavered as she repeated the words she'd practiced so many nights in her one-room apartment. Her palms trembled, not because she was unsure, but because she knew what would come next. They didn't believe her. Of course they didn't. The courtroom was filled with suits and stares that dismissed her before she even spoke. To them, she was just another case. Another woman crying wolf. Another name on a docket scheduled to be erased. It started like most stories that go ignored, with a quiet injustice. A boss who crossed a line. An opportunity stolen behind closed doors. A whisper campaign to silence her. And when she spoke up, they tried to drown her out with paperwork, legal jargon, and laughter. That cruel laughter. "You really think you have a case?" One attorney had smirked, his voice heavy with sarcasm. "This is ridiculous," another had said under his breath, not knowing she heard every word. But what they didn't know was that she had been preparing for this moment her entire life. Growing up, the world didn't hand her fairness. She had to fight for respect in classrooms, in jobs, and in rooms where people questioned her worth before she opened her mouth. She was too familiar with being doubted, too used to being told to calm down when her truth made others uncomfortable. So when this battle began, this cold, calculated attack on her character, she didn't crumble. She documented. She listened. She waited. And she knew the power of evidence. See, what they didn't realize, as they laughed and scribbled notes to each other during her testimony, was that this woman, this nobody to them, had a secret file. A collection of emails, voice recordings, screenshots, legal receipts, everything meticulously archived. For months, she had kept her silence, playing the long game while others thought they were getting away with destroying her name. Even her friends doubted her at one point. "You sure this is worth it?" one had asked. "You're up against powerful people, sis." And yet, night after night, she stayed up reading legal blogs, learning terminology, cross-checking every policy. She wasn't just building a case. She was building a bombshell. Still, in that courtroom, none of that mattered yet, because perception always came before proof. And she knew exactly how she was perceived: loud, dramatic, maybe lying. But what she also knew was that truth doesn't care how loud the lies get. It waits for its moment. And that moment was coming. The judge, barely concealing his boredom, asked her to summarize her claim. She did, calmly, confidently. The opposition leaned back, smirking. She reached into her bag slowly, like someone retrieving a weapon of divine truth. Her fingers closed around the brown file folder that had never left her side for over 7 months. Her heartbeat thundered, but her face stayed still. She laid on the table. The room changed. Suddenly, no one was laughing. Behind every piece of paper in that secret file was a night of silent crying. Behind every recording, a moment where her heart beat out of her chest, afraid someone might catch her. Behind every screenshot, every printed email, every marked date on her calendar, was pain turned into power. People think gathering evidence is easy. They think justice is as simple as just speak up. But for her, speaking up wasn't an option, not at first. She was a lone black woman in a system where even loud screams often go unheard. So she didn't scream. She observed. She recorded. She learned. The first incident was brushed off. Just a comment. Just a touch on the shoulder that lingered a little too long. "You're just being sensitive." That's what HR had said when she hesitantly brought it up. She knew better than to push back then. Instead, she started carrying a second phone. Not for calls, but for protection. Each time her boss came near, she hit record. Each time he sent a strange email, she took a screenshot. She'd go home and upload everything to a secure cloud drive, labeling each folder by date and interaction. To some, this might sound paranoid, but to her, it was survival. She watched, day after day, how certain people at her job got promoted while she stayed invisible. She watched her ideas being stolen in meetings, her credit handed to others with lighter skin and louder voices. And when she dared to speak, she was labeled difficult. But still, she didn't break. Instead, she began documenting everything. She even started dressing differently, less colorful, more professional, just to ensure no one could ever say she wasn't appropriate. She kept her tone calm at all times, knowing the world is quick to call a black woman angry the moment she raises her voice. And still, they mock her behind closed doors. She knew because she overheard them, and yes, she recorded that too. There was one meeting that broke her spirit momentarily. She'd spent weeks preparing a proposal. Her data was flawless. But before she could present it, her supervisor interrupted and gave it to someone else. Word for word. And everyone clapped. She went home that night and cried herself to sleep. But when she woke up, she didn't let the pain eat her. She added another page to the file. And then came the turning point. One afternoon, she received an accidental email. A message clearly not meant for her, where senior staff joked about her behind her back. There were cruel names, insults about her hair, accusations about her attitude. It was the kind of smoking gun no one could fake. But instead of reacting, she printed it, filed it, dated it, and then she requested a meeting with legal. Not to fight, yet but to ask questions, innocent ones, about contracts, about whistleblower protection laws, about HR protocols. She smiled through every meeting, while inside, she was drawing her map. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was preparing for war, in a battlefield where she had no armor, except the truth. And so months passed. Every injustice, every microaggression, every outright attack, she didn't just survive it. She documented it, turned it into a paper trail so strong, even the best legal team couldn't unravel it. It wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't even just about justice. It was about being heard. Because her voice alone wasn't enough. But her proof, her file, that was her loudest scream. The courtroom was colder than she expected. Not in temperature, but in energy. There were eyes watching her like she didn't belong there. Whispers traveled across the rows like echoes in a cave. Some smirked. Some looked bored. And then there were those who looked amused, like they were expecting a show. But what they didn't know was, she brought the whole theater with her. When her name was called, she stood tall, not because she felt confident, but because she had no choice. Her knees were trembling inside, her heart pounding so loud she thought the judge could hear it. But she didn't let it show. She had trained for this moment, night after night, practicing her breathing, rehearsing the facts, memorizing the sequence of events like lines in a sacred play. And now the curtain was rising. The opposing counsel started with mockery in their tone. Miss Daniels, can you prove anything you're saying? Or are these just emotional interpretations? She didn't blink. She simply reached in her bag and pulled out the file. It wasn't flashy, just a thick folder with neatly labeled dividers, each one organized by date, time, and subject. There was an eerie silence in the room when she placed it on the table, like everyone knew something had shifted. This, she said calmly, is not interpretation. This is documentation. Page after page, she began to speak. With each document, she painted a picture so vivid it left no room for doubt. Emails with timestamps, screenshots with metadata, audio recordings that capture conversations word for word. And then she played one. A voice echoed through the courtroom speakers. Her supervisor's voice, slurring a joke about her behind closed doors, calling her aggressive, ungrateful, and other words that made the audience shift uncomfortably in their seats. The judge raised an eyebrow. The defense tried to object, but it was too late. Each recording was a nail in the coffin of denial. Each screenshot a mirror showing the ugliness of what had been hidden for so long. And the more she revealed, the more the courtroom began to change. No one was smirking anymore. In fact, some of them looked shaken. The attorney defending the company flipped through the file like they were holding a grenade with the pin pulled out. They couldn't speak. They couldn't spin it, because it was all real. There was one moment. The moment that silenced even the judge. She pulled out an internal memo. A printed version of the email that had accidentally been sent to her. The one with the jokes, the names, the racial slurs. It was printed, annotated, and accompanied by IT-verified metadata, proving it hadn't been forged. "Would you like me to read it aloud?" she asked the courtroom, her voice clear and cold. No one said yes, but she read it anyway. Her voice did not shake. Her hands did not tremble. She spoke every insult they wrote about her like she was reading scripture, calmly, powerfully, so everyone could hear what had been whispered in the dark. By the time she was done, the courtroom didn't feel cold anymore. It felt haunted, haunted by their words, their actions, their laughter, which had once dismissed her, reduced her, humiliated her. No one was laughing now. Even the judge looked deeply disturbed. And then came the final blow, the moment she pulled out her witness list. People she had quietly spoken to, people who had also suffered but were too afraid to speak. People who saw her strength and decided, if she's standing up, maybe I can too. Witnesses who confirmed everything. Colleagues, former employees, even a janitor who had overheard things and remembered them word for word. It wasn't just a file anymore. It was a movement. The courtroom sat in silence as her testimony ended. Her lawyer leaned over and whispered, "That was extraordinary." And she just sat back, finally breathing a breath she had held in for years. Not because justice had been served yet, the verdict was still pending, but because the truth was finally louder than the lies. She looked over at the people who once rolled their eyes when she entered the room. Some couldn't even meet her gaze now. They looked down, ashamed, exposed, and for the first time, she felt seen. You could hear the verdict before it was even spoken, not from a judge's lips, but in the air, the shift in energy, the way the press leaned forward with sudden interest, the way people outside the courtroom began refreshing their phones, waiting, watching, whispering. And when she stepped outside the courtroom, everything had changed. The same steps she had walked up weeks ago, unnoticed, with trembling hands and a heavy heart. Now those steps felt like a red carpet. Flashes from cameras. Questions thrown her way. Reporters chasing for a quote. But she didn't speak just yet. She stood there, silent, centered, her head held high, not in pride but in peace. And the people noticed. Twitter noticed. Instagram noticed. News anchors noticed. And most of all, the silent watchers noticed. Within hours, her name was trending. Not because she was a celebrity, not because she had millions of followers, but because she was unshakable truth in human form. Clips of her testimony flooded social media. Millions watched the moment she read that email aloud. The names they called her, the laughter behind closed doors. It struck a nerve. Some cried, some cheered, some finally felt brave enough to speak about their pain too. She had unknowingly become a symbol. The headlines were no longer mocking or dismissive. Now they read, "Black woman destroys years of corporate silence with one file." The file that rocked the industry. Hero or just honest. Internet divided but inspired. And what followed wasn't just noise. It was action. Petitions were launched calling for firings, for internal investigations, for policy changes. HR departments across the country scrambled to review complaints they had ignored for years. People who had worked in that same office began posting anonymously, saying, "I worked there. Everything she said was true. I saw her cry in the bathroom once. I never said anything. I regret it now." She wasn't angry. She was exhausted. Even former employees of other companies were emboldened. Suddenly, inboxes of law firms were flooded with new cases. Newsrooms started hunting for similar stories. Activists found a new face to represent the pain of thousands. She didn't ask for this. She hadn't spoken up to become a hero. She just wanted to be heard. But that's the thing about truth. When spoken clearly, it echoes. Brands that once advertised diversity but ignored internal racism started issuing statements. Apologies, promises, some sincere, some performative, but all of it stirred by the force of her truth. Then came the interviews. She was invited to talk shows, podcasts, university panels, advocacy groups. People wanted to know, how did you stay so calm? Weren't you scared? What would you say to others who are still afraid? Her answer was always the same. It wasn't about courage. It was about survival. I didn't speak because I was brave. I spoke because silence was suffocating me. And that hit home for thousands. People who had never felt represented saw her as one of them, a mirror, not a monument. Real, relatable, raw. What surprised her most was the messages from younger Black women. Teenagers, college students, new employees. I used to think speaking up meant I'd lose everything. But you made me realize I was already losing myself by staying quiet. Those words meant more to her than headlines ever could. And while not everyone celebrated her, even the critics gave her power, because their attempts to belittle her only made others defend her louder, stronger. The ripples became waves. Other women stepped forward. Other men, too. Other colors, other backgrounds. Anyone who had ever been made to feel too much or not enough saw her and thought, if she did it, maybe I can too. It wasn't just her story anymore. It was a shared awakening, a reckoning, one that started with a secret file, but turned into a public movement. And she went home one evening, exhausted but light, to find a letter waiting at her door. Handwritten, no name, just words. You don't know me, but I was about to quit. Then I watched your story. Now I'm staying. Now I'm fighting. Because you made me believe again. She held the letter to her chest and let the tears fall. Not tears of sadness. Not even tears of victory. Because what had once made her feel small, her skin, her voice, her truth, had now made others feel strong. And she knew then this wasn't the end of her story. This was only the beginning. Before the courtroom, before the cameras, before the secret file ever had a name, there was just a woman trying to survive. A Black woman in a whitewashed office. A gentle voice in meetings where no one looked her way. A presence so overlooked, she began to wonder if she was invisible. They laughed around her, but never with her. They'd say, "You're always so serious." Or, you don't really look like someone who belongs in tech. Sometimes, it wasn't even words. It was the pauses when she entered the room. The subtle changes in tone when she spoke. The way her ideas were repeated by someone else, and only then applauded. She started to shrink herself without realizing it, wearing neutral tones, keeping her hair straight to avoid the stares, saying, "I'm sorry," before offering suggestions. At night, she'd rehearse what she'd say the next day, only to stay silent again when the moment came. Because the room was cold, because the stares were louder than words, because fear had made a home inside her chest. Still, she came in every day, early, prepared, professional, and always underestimated. She was the kind of employee companies called diversity wins in their reports, but never truly listened to. When promotions came, she was told, "You're doing great, but we're just not sure you're quite ready yet." When she trained new hires, they were paid more than her. And when she finally asked for fair compensation, they smiled and said, "It's not about race. It's just about fit." Fit. Like she was a puzzle piece too bold to belong in their picture. The worst part? There were moments she believed them. She began to question herself. Was she too sensitive? Was she imagining it? Was she sabotaging her own success? Gaslighting doesn't always come in dramatic forms. Sometimes it's quiet, polite, professional. It seeps in through everyday exchanges until you start editing your very being to keep others comfortable. But her soul, it refused to stay silent forever. And the breaking point wasn't loud either. It came on a Tuesday, a regular day, rainy, forgettable. She had just stepped into the restroom when she heard two coworkers talking, laughing. She thinks she's going to get that team lead role? Girl, please. Yeah, she should be grateful we even hired her with that attitude. She's always so intense. They hadn't realized she was there. That moment, small to some, devastating to her, stayed with her all night. And that's when she opened her laptop and created a folder. She named it, "In Case I Disappear." Inside, she began collecting everything. Emails, messages, notes from meetings, screenshots, dates, names, patterns. Not to attack anyone, but to prove to herself that she wasn't crazy, that she wasn't imagining the weight she carried, that her truth mattered, even if no one else saw it. She kept going, quietly, carefully, all while smiling at the office party, while clapping at team wins, while pretending that the passive-aggressive jokes didn't sting. There were nights she cried so hard her chest hurt. Mornings where getting dressed felt like preparing for battle. Yet no one around her noticed, because she had mastered the art of appearing fine. She journaled. She prayed. She asked God, "Why did you put me here if no one sees me? Why do I keep showing up when I just want to run?" And the answer came, not in a voice, but in a growing conviction. Because one day, you will not just be seen. You will make others feel seen too. That thought kept her going, even when HR dismissed her concerns, even when her so-called friends turned distant, even when her light began to dim. She clung to the file, not just as evidence, but as a form of survival. And over time, the file became her secret sanctuary, her mirror, her proof. She wasn't broken. She was brilliant. She was brave. She was building something bigger than they could understand. They had no idea what she carried behind that quiet smile. No clue what it had cost her just to show up every day. But she knew, and that made her unstoppable. The day the verdict came in, the courtroom was packed. Flashbulbs popped. The world leaned in to see how the story would end. And when the judge uttered those words, in favor of the plaintiff, there was a hush, as if the room itself had a pause to truly feel what had just happened. She didn't cry. Not yet. She didn't scream. Not yet. She just breathed. A deep, full, sacred breath. The kind she hadn't taken in years. It wasn't just a legal victory. It was a resurrection. They had tried to bury her. With their mockery. With their dismissal. With their disbelief. But they didn't know she was soil. And from that soil, something unstoppable had grown. Still, when the microphones came rushing in, she didn't speak of revenge. She didn't name names with fire in her tone. She simply said, "This isn't just about me. This is for every woman who was ever told she was too much, too loud, too dark, too different to be believed." It wasn't just a file that brought her justice. It was her faith, her refusal to fold, her belief that truth, no matter how long it's ignored, always finds the light. You see, justice wasn't just a win on paper. It was a return to self. The woman who once whispered in rooms that ignored her now walked into boardrooms with her head high. The woman who once apologized for her brilliance now mentored others to own theirs. The woman who once doubted her worth now stood as living proof that silence is not the price of survival. She started getting emails. Hundreds, then thousands, from women around the world. Some whispered, "I've been through the same." Others shouted, "You gave me the courage to speak." She realized her story had become a spark, not to burn things down, but to light the way forward. She was invited to panels, asked to write a book, even got a call from a producer who wanted to turn her story into a film. But none of those things moved her the way a simple moment did. One afternoon, months after the case, she visited a local school to speak. As she stepped off the small stage, a little black girl, no older than 9, walked up to her and asked, "Can I be like you when I grow up?" She knelt down, smiled, and said, "Baby, you could be better." That, right there, was justice. Not the headlines, not the settlement, but the shift in legacy. The realization that she had broken a cycle. That because she stood firm, the next generation wouldn't have to start from silence. They could start from power. And what about the company? The ones who had once laughed, doubted, and tried to erase her? Some of them resigned. Others sent quiet apologies. But she didn't need their guilt, because she had found something far more valuable. The kind of peace that comes when you know you did the hard thing, the right thing, the thing most are too afraid to do. She had walked through the fire, not only unburned, but reborn. And now, every time she walked past a mirror, she didn't just see a survivor. She saw a warrior, a woman who turned pain into purpose, who took notes when they doubted her, and turned them into a song the world couldn't ignore. She saw the woman who said, "No more shrinking, no more silence. I was made for more." And oh, how right she was.